When he became a judge, he realized that in order to be a complete judge, he had to master criminal law as well. So when he would go to Mahabaleshwar in the months of May and June to spend the vacation of the Bombay High Court, he would take along with him every conceivable commentary on the law of crimes and the law of evidence. And he would spend his days at Mahabaleshwar a month and a half, reading up criminal law so that he could become an expert on criminal law. And he mastered criminal law as well. So the message that we get from his life is a message of a human being whose life was dedicated to the pursuit of justice, to the pursuit of truth, but above all, the pursuit of learning. I consider myself to be really blessed to have spent many evenings in his house, not in the companionship. I was much too small, I was much too young to be a companion to Justice Gajendragadkar. I was only a young child, as Ashok was. In his house in 12th Tughlaq Road in New Delhi, we stayed in 13th Tughlaq Road. But every evening when we went to the house of Justice Gajendragadkar, he and his very gracious wife, Shalini Tai, would spend an enormous amount of time speaking to us as youngsters, giving us values, telling us about life, telling us about law. And one of my most treasured acquisitions is an autographed copy of his book which he wrote later on social democracy. Let me conclude the first part of my presentation this morning, and before I really go on to something different, by narrating a verse from Gitanjali by Rabindranath Tagore, which was extraordinarily dear to Dr. Justice Gajendragadkar. As a child, he must have narrated this verse to me so many times. As a young man, I had heard him speak so many times when he quoted from the Gitanjali. And therefore, I thought that it would not be inappropriate for me to narrate a verse which would make him happy and which would remind us so much about him. And the verse, I'm sure a lot of you have read this and a lot of you have appreciated it. But let me then just narrate it for you. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. How true these words are even today for us. These words talk about freedom, freedom from fear. Freedom from fear means the freedom to live a life free from the fear of how others would judge your life. Where the head is held high signifies a life of dignity. Do we in our society give a life of dignity to women? Do we in our society give a life of dignity to the marginalized? Where the world has not been broken into fragments by narrow domestic walls, have we broken our society into narrow domestic walls based on religion, based on caste, based on community? Where the words come out from the depth of truth. What is truth? That's something which I want to briefly dwell on in the course of my presentation this morning. Where the mind is led forward by thought and action. That is ultimately the message of the Gita. Namely, that your life has to be dedicated to action, not to the pursuit of a goal, but where action itself becomes the goal. You do not crave after the fruits of your labor, but your labor itself is the fruit for you as a human being. And that is the heaven. That is the heaven through which we expect our country to emerge. Last month, all of us were shaken up by the gang rape which took place in New Delhi. Let us dwell very briefly on what the issues for our society are. On 7th of January 2013, there was an article in the New York Times by a lady called Sohaila Abdul Ali. 32 years ago, she stepped out from her house in Chembur when she was just 16 years old for a stroll with a young friend. She was gang raped and nearly killed. 32 years later, now she has written, at 17 she says, I was just a child. Life rewarded me richly for surviving. I stumbled home, wounded and traumatized, to a great family. With them on my side, so much came my way. I found true love. I wrote books. I saw a kangaroo in the wild. I caught buses and missed trains. I had a shining child. The century changed. My first grey hair appeared. But too many other women will never experience that bliss. Have we changed now? Or is it essentially the same society that we live in? Has our society really changed? Can we say that our society has changed when we treat a woman who is a victim of a crime as the offender? We ask questions when a woman is offended, in the sense criminally violated. We ask questions like, why was she there at that time of the night? What was the woman wearing? Are these questions to be asked to a woman who is subject to a criminal offense? Why do we define the role of women in terms of what the males in our society believe should be the proper place for a dignified woman? Why do we curb the freedom which a woman must possess to live the life of dignity that she wants to live? When an offence takes place, very often the police refuse to register an FIR. So many women who have been violated. Sohaila Abdul Ali, whose case I gave you, says that when her father went to lodge an FIR, the police asked her and him, do you really want to lodge an FIR? That would be a stigma on your daughter for the rest of her life. When a medical examination takes place is to determine whether she is habituated to intercourse. As a citizen of India, I feel ashamed. I really feel ashamed when they say that the offence of rape is an affront to the honor and dignity of a family. The offence of rape is not just an affront to the honor and dignity of a family. When we talk of honor and dignity, the reason why you are talking of honor and dignity is that it is presumed to be an affront or an insult to the dignity of the males in the family. But is that really the essence of the point? Is that the essence of the offence? To my mind, as a judge and as a citizen, the offence of rape or any offence involving a woman is horrible because it violates a woman. Someone else takes control over her body and hurts her in the most intimate of ways. I began the second part of my presentation this morning by asking you this question. Has our society really changed? Has it changed from what we were 32 years ago? But I think our society has changed. I'm sure there are a large number of young students in the audience. And these students in the audience are an indicator to us that our society has changed. The massive outpouring in New Delhi and across the country in the last 2 months, the massive gatherings in colleges, in streets, in homes, is sufficient to indicate that India has changed. But there is much work still to be done. We have a lot of work to do. The primary change which we need to bring about in India is to redefine the culture of masculinity in which we live. I think our society is dominated by a culture of masculinity. Therefore, when we speak about the offence of rape being an affront to the dignity and honor of a family, we are only emphasizing this deep-rooted culture of masculinity. That culture must change. We have a society which is predominantly based on patriarchy and caste. That culture must change. Last week or 2 weeks back, the Supreme Court delivered a judgment in a case where a wife had committed suicide.